Hey guys, we're back with the notes for 10.2. Today we're going to learn how to take those same equations that you made in 10.1 from the graph and we're going to convert them from vertex form into standard form. So if you'll pause the screen, write what you see, we'll get started. Perfect. Okay, you're going to have 3 steps on every single problem and I'm going to expand, distribute, and combine them by using the letters E, D, C as a way to remind you what we're doing. Okay, first thing is going to be expand. So expand means that I'm keeping everything. All I'm doing is expanding the parentheses from a binomial with 2 terms to a trinomial by applying the squared. Okay, here's the pattern for that. No matter what, you're always going to have x squared first. So let's say I was using this binomial, x plus 4 squared. My first piece is always going to be x squared. The middle number is going to be times 2 of whatever's at the end. So if I take a positive 4 and I multiply it times 2, I would get a positive 8. That term is going to have an x with him every single time. So x squared first times 2 is 8x, and it's positive. And then I'm going to square the number for the third part. So if I do a positive 4 squared, 4 times 4 is 16. This is what the expanded form would look like. Okay? Now, it looks very similar if you have a minus sign. Again, we're always going to start with x squared. We're going to do times 2. So if I take a negative 5 and I multiply it times 2, I get a negative 10, and I put an x with that. The last one is the main problem that people run into, and I promise you're going to see it on the quiz and the practice. When you square a negative number, that's like saying negative 5 times negative 5. A negative times itself, or a negative times a negative, is always a positive. So no matter what, when you square a number, that third guy has to be positive every single time. Okay? I don't care that it's negative. If you multiply it times itself, it's going to come out to be a positive. Okay? The only signs that should match when you expand are these 2. Everything else is positive. Okay? All right, let's go ahead and look at what the next 2 steps look like. So we talked about expand. Expand means that you're going to do x squared, double the number, square the number, but you're keeping everything around it. Okay, so if I kind of highlight what we're keeping the 2 from the out front, and we're keeping the plus 5 that was on the end. Because once we get those pieces brought down, then I can move to my next 2 steps. My next step is distribute. Whatever is in the front is going to distribute to everybody in the parenthesis. Distribute means multiply, right? So 2 times x squared, 2x squared. 2 times a negative 6 is a negative 12. 2 times a positive 9 is a positive 18. But when the parentheses end, you're distributing ends. You are not going to distribute to the number after the parenthesis, okay? What you're going to do is save that plus 5, or save that number at the end until the very, very last step. At the very last step, you are going to combine them. You're going to combine whatever your last 2 pieces are, 18 plus 5, come together to make that plus 23, okay? All right, so for the first couple problems, I really want to just focus on the expand step. That's going to definitely be the hardest part. So on problems 2 and 3, can you pause it and set up what you see? Perfect. Let's go ahead and look at that. So I'm going to go back to the same color, kind of the purpley color, and we're going to expand. You have to have 3 pieces in the parentheses. The first one is always x squared. The middle one is taking this number and doubling it. Okay, so negative 2 times 2 is a negative 4. And I have to remember that he gets an x with him. The last one, I'm going to square it. So if I take a negative 2 times a negative 2, so times itself, I get a positive 4. That is my expand step. Okay? The next 2 steps are usually pretty easy for people. I'm going to distribute the front number. So 3 times x squared is 3x squared. 3 times negative 4x is negative 12x. 3 times positive 4 is positive 12. And then this little guy just comes down. I'm not using that minus 4 yet. I don't use him until this very last step when I combine. My last 2 guys do not have x's. They're like terms because they're both constants. So if I combine a positive 12 minus 4, I get 8, right? So 3x squared minus 12x plus 8. That's a full answer. It's going to be the same 3 steps every time. They're never going to change orders. Just those three pieces, okay? All right, let's go ahead and look at number 3. Number 3, starting again with that expand. Okay, so if I expand, I always start with x squared. I take this number and I multiply it times 2. So positive 5 times 2 is a positive 10. Put my x with it. And then the last one I'm going to square. So 5 squared is 25. Basically 5 times 5. All right. Like I said, most people are usually good if you can get to the expand step. So then we distribute. I'm going to take negative 2 times everybody in the parenthesis. So negative 2 times x squared is negative 2x squared. Negative 2 times a positive 10. You might keep your phone handy because you're going to be multiplying with negatives. Okay, it's going to be a negative 20. Keep the x. Negative 2 times positive 25 is a negative 50. You are not distributing to that 1. He's staying right out here until the very end. I don't use that plus 1 until I get to my combine step. I'm going to combine these. Now, using a calculator, there's no reason to miss these problems just because you're trying to do it in your head and rush through it. You're guaranteeing you get them wrong, okay? Negative 50 plus 1 is not 51. It's a negative 49. So when you combine those, negative 2x squared minus 20x stays the same. Combine those gives me a negative 49. I'm going to pause the screen for just a second. Go ahead and make sure you have all of that copied exactly like it is on the paper, okay? We're going to flip to the next side. All right, I'm going to zoom out for just a second. I want you to copy everything that's on this screen. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're not going to do number 9 though. Perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with these ones. Remember, if I didn't give you enough time, rewind it and pause it. So on problem 4, we're going to practice that expand again. Remember that I'm still keeping the negative 3 before the parentheses. I'm still keeping the positive 2 after the parentheses. All I'm really doing is expanding the parentheses, okay? Nothing else am I messing with on that first step. All right, so I always start with x squared. My middle number is always times 2. So negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. Keep an x with him. And then the last one is squared. Make sure when I say what's 1 squared, I'm saying what's 1 times 1. 1 times 1 is just 1, and it's always going to be positive on the end. Okay? All right, we're moving into our next step, and that's the multiplication. Remember that if you multiply by a negative, your sign has to change. So my x squared changes to negative 3x squared. A negative times a negative makes a positive 6x. Negative times a positive changes to a negative 3. And I'm going to drop down my plus 2. I have not used this guy yet. Okay. All right, my last step is always combine. So we are looking for the last 2 terms. That's always going to be who combines. Whoever the 2 numbers are at the end that don't have x's. So negative 3x squared plus 6x. Negative 3 plus 2 is a negative 1. Again, there's no way to teach you a shortcut for that. If you don't know your integers, you're going to have to just type them in your phone. Okay? All right, number 5. Number 5 is going to be a little bit stressful. You have that fraction on there, right? Don't worry about it. I am never going to have you type in a number that's going to give you a decimal, okay? So if you are taking half of something, that means all your numbers should be even. Let's go ahead and do one full problem here with all the pieces, okay? All right, I keep the 1/2. I make my parentheses expand so there's space for 3 of them, and I keep the minus 10. Notice that I don't keep the exponent. As soon as I expand my parentheses, I don't have that 2 on the top anymore. All I have to do is fill out my 3 pieces, right? So I always start with x squared. My middle number is times 2. So 4 times 2 is 8 with an x. And then I square it. 4 times 4 is 16. So that's my end guy. Everything's positive on that problem in the parentheses, okay? All right, let's move into our distribute. Distribute means I am cutting the numbers in half. Okay, so if I take x squared and I cut it in half, I can't really do that, right? Just like all the other problems, 3 times x squared, 3x squared. 1/2 times x squared, just 1/2 x squared. It does not change the x. It does not change the exponent. You just put the 1/2 in front of it, okay? All right, so if I do half of 8x, I should get 4x. Make sure it stays positive. Half of 16 should be 8. And I'm going to bring down that -10. I have not used him yet. All right, we got one more step. I'm still combining the last two pieces. So 8 minus 10, it's going to get weird, right? I got to go into the negatives. So 1/2 x squared plus 4x. 8 minus 10 should be a -2. And that is the end of that problem, okay? Take a second, write down anything you didn't get during problems 4 and 5, and then we'll continue. Awesome. Okay, on problem number 6 is the last one that we are going to do with all the pieces. What I want you to pay attention to on number 6 is that there's no number in front of the parentheses, but there is a negative. I want you to make a little note that this is a ninja one. Ooh, totally spelled that wrong, sorry. Okay, so there is a little ninja, -1 right there. So I'm going to keep that -1, expand my parentheses, and keep my -13. I'm going to make my 3 places in the parentheses, and I'm going to remember that I always start with x squared. I multiplied the middle one times 2, so 4x, and I square the last one. Now, what's the fun thing about 2 times 2 and 2 squared? They give you the same number. 2 is the only number where that will happen, so do not ever look back at a question with a 2 on it and say, oh yeah, they have to be the same. No, they're not the same on any other problem. They only work like that when your parenthesis number is 2, okay? All right, we're moving on to the distribute. When you multiply by a -1, all that happens is the sign changes, okay? So my x squared changes to a -x squared. If you put -1, that's fine. My 4x changes to a -4x, and my 4 changes to a -4. But the 13 is not changing. He is staying negative because he did not distribute, okay? All right, we are moving on to our very, very last step. Last step is to combine like terms. -4 and -13 is like combining your debt. If you owe me $4 and now you owe me 13 more, now you owe me a total of $17. So your ending number is a -17. Make sure you're using a calculator on these so you don't mess them up, okay? All right. Problems 7 and 8 are special for a different reason. Oops. Hopefully you wrote down on 7 and 8 already. When you do 7, because there is no, let me change colors, because there is no number out here before the parentheses, we are not going to distribute anything, okay? We're going to do the expand step and right into the combine. On problem 8, because there's no number out at the end, we're not going to combine anything. All we're going to do is expand and distribute, okay? So I wanted to make sure you had that written down so that when you see it on the practice and the quiz, you don't get curious about why we're not doing those pieces, okay? All right, so on problem 7, let's do that one first. Problem 7, there's nothing before the parentheses. I expand them and I keep the 9. I always have 3 pieces in the parentheses, x squared times 2 times itself. So I did -3 times 2 is -6. -3 squared is a +9. Because I don't have to distribute, I'm going to go straight into my combining right here, okay? I don't need to keep the parentheses. I can take them off. Oops, it's a really fat marker, sorry. I can take them off and just go x squared minus 6x plus 18. There's nothing to distribute. Technically, you distributed a ninja one, but since nothing changed, I can just skip that and go to the combine, okay? All right, so only 2 lines on that problem. Make sure you have everything written for 6 and 7. We have one last question. Let's hit number 8. All right, problem number 8. We're going to expand our parentheses. So we keep the 4. We make our parentheses longer, but your exponent is gone. Do not ever put a squared in your problem other than this guy right here, x squared, okay? All right, 3 pieces in my parenthesis, x squared. I go times 2, which is 2x, and times itself, which is 1. Remember, 1 times 1 is just 1. All right, one more time. We are going to distribute the number in front of the parentheses. 4 times x squared is 4x squared. 4 times 2 is 8x. 4 times 1 is 4. And we don't have, let me show you one more time, we don't have anything to combine out here. Okay, so because there's nothing left, we just stop right there. We do not need to combine anything over here. Okay? All right, we are not going to do problem 9, so you are ready to get started on your practice. On the practice, you are going to do, I think, problems 1 through 6, but don't do number 2. So let me write that one more time. On your practice 10.2, you are getting started on that.